Jen, are we good? Ray, we're good? We're broadcasting? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our January 23rd Portsmouth Town Council meeting. We are starting early tonight due to our jam-packed agenda. So what I'd like to do is just quickly go through our emergency evacuation plan. In the event of an emergency, you have two doors to your left, one in the front of the chambers here. We would exit the building, cross Middle Road, and await further instruction at the school administration building. So if we have to scramble out of here, orderly fashion up here. And with that, if we could all stand for our pledge of allegiance and a moment of silence for our men and women serving in harm's way. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic that stands liberty and justice.
Thank you all. Okay, just for those of you who do not normally chime in on these meetings, we have the school committee up front here with us as well. So we'll take roll call and then I'll just go through a couple of other housekeeping matters.
Mr. Katzman,
Here.
Mr. Gleason,
Here.
Mr. Hamilton,
Here.
Mr. Levesque,
Yeah.
Dr. Ryan,
Here.
Mr. Aguirre.
Here. Okay, and then for the school committee, just so for those of you scorekeeping, Ms. Copeland is not here. We have with us Ms. Kelly.
Here.
Mr. Bayero.
Here.
Emily Skian,
Here.
Ms. McDade,
Here.
Mr. Farber. Here. And Ms. Blanc.
Here.
All right. Okay. For those of you who, it's the legislative priority, so I don't have to go through. For those of you chiming in from home, all of our comments are going to be limited to council, school committee, and our delegates. And with us tonight, we have Senator Ragusa, Representative Cortran, and Representative McGaugh. No one else is coming that you're aware of.
That is it.
Okay. And prior to tonight's meeting, did you all receive full copies of both the council priorities as well as the school committee priorities? And there are, I think there was 11 from the council and 6 from the school committee. Is that correct? I have that backwards.
I think it's 5
5.
from the committee. One has multiple parts.
And we have we do have a couple that are similar in nature. So what I'd like to do is I guess we can start with the school committee side of the legislative priorities. If any members of the school committee want to speak to anything specific, to ask the delegates, or just get some feedback from the delegates, however you'd like to, kind of an open forum here.
Do we want to go through the priorities one by one, or I don't know?
We'll be here all night.
We tend to keep it to less than 5. So not as bad. So we will kind of go high level over them, and please, fellow members of the committee, feel free to chime in as you see fit. Our first general priority is and probably will always be about funding the school system itself. And as you can see, we have broken it up into 3 different pots. One is the high cost of special education. Our 23-24 budget out of district tuition is estimated to be over $1 million. Portsmouth typically receives about $100,000 from high-cost special education funding to offset these costs. We would just love to see the state legislators increase the support for that high-cost special education. Although like the Massachusetts plan would be ideal, we know that that's just not going to be possible in just one legislative session, but anything that we can do in order to mediate that huge burden that we have in our district would be huge. Coinciding with that would be statewide transportation costs. For FY23, it's just over $600,000. The legislature enacted the statewide transportation for all students who attend school out of their residence ELA or district to provide fiscal efficiencies for students' transportation outside of the district. The system, while reportedly offering efficiencies, has failed year after year. And to accomplish this, so we request that the state address this issue by studying the effectiveness of statewide transportation and identifying the cost-effective measures that we can in order to another issue that goes hand in hand and just sets us off at a deficit, and just as we are going into our budget season. The third part is allocating state funds for education and the revisions to the funding formula. And I know that especially in the Senate, it may seem like it's a legislative priority. We just want to make sure that whatever revisions to the funding formula does not hinder us from the beginning. And as we've seen the last couple of days with the governor's budget that was proposed, certain districts do get some benefits to it, but this is probably, and the administration could speak to it, probably the 10th to 11th year in the funding formula that Portsmouth gets shortchanged, and again adds to a going into a budget season with a revenue deficit. So those are the for the funding issues that we want to see address this legislative session. I don't want to hear this on my own voice because I could hear the echo. Does anyone else on the committee want to go through some of the other items?
I just want to add one comment about the funding, particularly as it pertains to special ed. Not only are these high numbers, but as you probably are aware, there are also numbers that can change very dramatically. If we have a family move into the district, family move out of the district, a child who has different needs than they had the year before, it can mean a very significant change in the expenses that are accrued. And so that makes the budgeting all the more difficult. And of course, you know, we're not only do we want to educate children in the best possible way, but it's also the law. So it's not something that we have that we can cut back on. So
Can you go through two?
sure.
He's cheating
I'm-
off my
I
pay.
am. So
So much the school department.
So our second priority has to do with the Every Student Succeeds Act and the determination process associated with that. And essentially, to sort of summarize what happens sometimes when students are under the care of the Rhode Island Department of Child, Youth and Families, they are placed in residential settings. When they're placed in Portsmouth, we are responsible if that child has an out-of-district placement in a different school, we are responsible for the expenses associated with that. And what happens sometimes is because these kids sometimes move residences frequently, if that child moves to a different residence in a different district, the desire of the state or of DCYF is to keep their school environment consistent, and which is a good thing. Unfortunately, the way that the process works, that sometimes means that we're left holding the bag for a student who no longer lives in Portsmouth. So that's sort of an administrative issue that we'd like to see corrected.
The next one is age-appropriate career development for a green economy. I know in previous years, Representative Corcoran and I have worked on getting Portsmouth to sign a resolution supporting it. We would just love to see request that career development and green economy and just kind of being able to really move that forward, especially to tie in to number 4, school waste recycling and waste removal, which became law last year and went into effect at the beginning of the year. Those types of measures make it possible for us to be able to cultivate a green economy and a green culture here in Portsmouth. And we want to make sure that, and although well-intended, the law is an unfunded mandate, and we would just love to see that the legislature fund it in the upcoming budget. And we have done it in the past in order to be able to divert food waste. But I think that we have a unique position, especially with the Ag Innovation Farm down the block, and things that we've already done here, to be able to actually be a model for the entire state as to how to actually do it in our educational settings. And last but not least, and I don't think it would, I think it should be everyone's priority. We need high-speed internet on Aquidneck Island. I don't think I need to say more about that.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Is there going to be an opportunity for the council to weigh in on school department priority?
Well, I mean, it's just kind of a discussion. If you want to weigh in on it, now's your
I'm
chance.
going to tell you, I brought this, and if you hear it, it's a timer. Because I could do a TED talk on every single one of these. Okay, which means, by the way, if you don't know, 30 minutes. But I've limited myself to 1 minute on each topic, because otherwise people would probably hurt me. Karen's already stealing my paper. She's the bully. She's the bully. Okay, so hit the button. Am I recognized?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. High courts of special ed. You may know that, in fact, it may be that the schools are now going to be required to make sure that learning disabled children have all the access to have a free, appropriate public education. It's in front of the Supreme Court. I believe this is right. And I think for the community, I just say, having a child's learning disability addressed means that child will have a real opportunity to be a productive citizen. And it is one of the most important things that the legislature, US, did back in '77. They never sent along any money, but it is a great idea. I also did a study one time and found like something like 85 to 90% of the people in our ACI at that time could reasonably be diagnosed with having had a learning disability, unrecognized, untreated. So it gives you an idea of the high cost of this. So I definitely believe that that's an issue that has to be addressed. That's one. And I will now move on. Okay, statewide transportation is all you know. This is it's important. And basically, one of the things that happens is that a lot of parochial schools, particularly Hendricken, draft or draw a lot of very high-powered people's children into their orbit. However, all of us know that the cost of educating all of those children in our own schools would be a fairly prohibitive cost. So the idea has always been that the transportation will allow us to have less students, but we will provide them transport, materials, books, whatever. Okay. There should be a plan though, and the plan should have at least some equity. It's kind of interesting to find that somebody, out in the 10-mile drive in Newport somehow is in the same district as Hendricken. You can look and find somebody who knows somebody there. So that's a problem, and there should be a plan. I'm doing pretty good here. Okay. Allocating state funds for the education. I say this just to my colleagues. I was a legislator. In order to have the formula address needs in a community like Portsmouth, because regrettably, Portsmouth has a reputation for being wealthy and well-run. I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't convince them they were wrong about that we were poor and we had a bunch of maniacs in the place. They told me one time in order to get like another $100,000 to Portsmouth, they had to add like 20 million to the overall budget supporting education in any formula they looked at. I'm just saying this, have some understanding. You're asking your legislatures to dig through a very big hill. But it's worthwhile. Obviously, Portsmouth deserves its fair share, but our fair share might be a little less than you think. The next one I wanted just to do was, actually very shortly, doing the school waste and recycling. One, I certainly agree with the high-speed internet. I think that's a necessity within almost every place. The school waste program, in the old days, it used to be Louis Escobar. And Louis passed away. I don't know who is doing it now, but that was great. He used to come and take almost all of our garbage, and he had some robust hogs that wouldn't come up on their own because they're lazy. But nonetheless, they would be, he would use it, and it was a wonderful kind of symbiotic relationship. I would like to see that, because wasting anything, but particularly foodstuffs that come out of our cafeteria, is a bad idea. And I'm done. A round of applause could be appreciated. Oh, you're definitely talking.
Any other comments from counselors on the school priorities? Okay. On the town side, there are a couple of overlap ones that I think we all are definitely in support of, with the increase in funding for schools, as well as the broadband service, anything that can be done there. And I thank all those that helped put the priorities together. I think from my perspective, one of the most important ones here is also number 3, which is the finding an alternate solution to the LNG gas situation, some type of redundant source onto the island. We all know we only have one form of gas supply onto the island, and if something were to happen to that, it would be devastating for the island. So that, I mean, of all these priorities, I think that is one that is also anything that could be done there to help out. I know it's tough. It's National Grid, or it's Rhode Island Energy. What?
I'd also like to point out that part of the reason why we have this problem is that Newport had an orgy of allowing large hotels to be built and tie into the gas supply. So is Newport still doing that? Do we know? Maybe a resolution to ask Newport to stop building large new hotels that further strain our gas supply would be a good idea.
Yeah, well, I think I think it's a private entity. They're there to make money. But I do think that with some effort, we could at least get some focus on the one supply line onto the island. And it's I think we've heard from them in the past, it's undersized. It does not meet the peak demand in the winter months. So we have the portable LNG that's brought in, and that's used for peak shaving and whatnot. But that continues. I think the trend is that's going to continue to get used more and more as a temporary solution. So anything that can be done on that end. Yes. Were you giving me 1 minute?
You may have noticed there was a very nice article in the paper. I'm doing 1 minute.
Okay.
Today talking about this very issue. And the issue that they raised, and I think, are we moving to green energy or not? Obviously, we're in a position where we need to at least address current energy needs as we move. But one of the people made a very sound point, I think, is that, if they build it, they will use it. If you make a tremendous capital investment in a larger or a second line, you're going to have people who are going to want to pipe gas. Now, I use that for my heating, so it is not just a casual thing. But nonetheless, I think that I would ask that I respect, and I think it is a balance that has to be made. But I would kind of prefer that we use all the resources we can to go to a greener source. 7 seconds left.
Okay, I believe Representative. Oh. Oh.
think the Act on Climate now requires the state to do that. And if I recall in our early discussions with National Grid, when it was National Grid right after, and I know legislators were involved, and I think the town council was involved in discussions with them too. And they really said to us that they had taken adding an extra line onto the island off the table because it would be too controversial. And they just didn't think that that would ever happen. But that the one line that is coming across the Secundit,
Yeah.
and maybe somebody could tell me more about it, but that is being replaced. And it's our understanding that it's going from a 6-inch line to a 12-inch line, but I'm not an engineer.
Yeah.
So maybe somebody can tell us what that
I can
means.
tell you that making the line bigger does not solve the problem of peak shaving. We have a twofold issue here. One is just the flow of gas in general. If you have one pipeline coming to the island, that means it's dead ending someplace on the island. So you don't have free flow
Right,
around it
no
because
loop.
it's coming back one place. Having a secondary pipeline on the north or on the west side would allow free flow. So that if the east side is damaged or interrupted, it just flows from the other side, which is what happened in Newport. When the flow died, it cascaded throughout the system and killed it all. We need to look at this as a dual system or dual issue, excuse me, on our end. One is we need a consistent flow. And I agree with Councilor Levesque that we should be looking at everything. The problem is that the green energy solutions are not going to be coming fast enough in order to provide a safe, reliable source of gas for people here on the island. So we need to be looking at both the gas line and other green energy issues. If we don't do it in conjunction with each other, we end up like California and have rolling blackouts. Our grid does not have the ability to sustain itself with all electric energy. That's why the gas secondary pipeline is so important. If, God forbid, that pipeline goes down again, it could cascade all the way up the island. And I too have gas, and this is not a selfish issue. This is an issue of everybody. The economy in Newport is built, as Dr. Ryan mentioned, hotels have gas. Every restaurant uses gas to cook. So if we want to destroy the economy of Rhode Island, leave the pipeline off the thing. Now, the second thing is we have an industrial gas plant now neighboring our constituents here on Old Mill Lane. It needs to be removed. That is not the place for that facility to be. So we need to push for the secondary pipeline, not only to provide safe energy for the people on the island, but also to get that industrial gas plant out of the neighborhood of Old Mill Lane.
Thank you, Mr.
Is
Hamilton.
the only location that's ever, the only other location I've heard is on the base, on the other side of the fence, and I've heard that's a no-go too.
Well,
When we started to talk about doing something on the west side, I had constituents that live over there calling me, no, not over here. So,
It shouldn't be.
Yeah.
The solution is honestly to either come across from Tiverton or even better, come across from Bristol, because Bristol is dead ended at the end of Bristol. This is a statewide solution that should be able to be handled by the Energy Facility Siting Board and the PUC. But unfortunately, they only take proposals that come to them. And Rhode Island Energy and Algonquin, who run the pipelines,
Right.
are not bringing this forward. As you mentioned, they're like, it's too much and too controversial. No,
Mhm.
they have the infrastructure money from the act last year. They have the ability to put this pipeline in. They need to do it.
I think Mr. Hamilton brought up a good point. The pipeline is not owned by National Grid or Rhode Island Energy.
Right,
It's Algonquin. So I think you,
Right. Rhode Island
You're nailing
Energy
Jell-O.
invited us all in to have lunch with them, but
Yeah.
Algonquin was not there.
and I believe the line that they're replacing is only the piece that's underneath the
Under the
bay.
water.
Yes,
They're not
Yes.
replacing the entire.
So when it comes back up onto Old Mill Lane, it's still the same.
okay. Okay.
So anything, as Mr. Hamilton mentioned, it's two pronged. Obviously, we have the supply issue, but if we do have a redundant supply, then we can eliminate the need for the portable LNG facility in our residential neighborhood, which I think is what we're all trying to get rid of, because that has the potential for, really extreme situations if something were to go wrong.
I don't disagree.
I would also echo Councilor Levesque's point. if you build it, they'll use it. So I think if we're going to do anything to increase gas flow through the island, there should be a simultaneous moratorium on major commercial tie-ins. We really can, I mean, if we continue to make gas available, we continue to encourage the economic use of that gas, which then just perpetuates the need for more and more and more. So if we ask for an extra pipeline, we should be asking for a general moratorium on large commercial facilities tying in with new tie-ins to the gas supply.
Again, remember, it's not necessarily greater capacity. It's redundant capacity. If you want to look at it this way, if I'm the beginning of the pipeline and we all have an oxy fuel torch and I start mine, Emily starts hers, David starts hers. By the time it gets to Isabella, it starts going out. You never are able to pull your torch to cut anything. It's the same at home. So we might have heat, or Mr. Levesque doesn't. You're at the end of the pipeline, sorry. It's the
Well,
redundancy,
you know,
it's not the
I mentioned-
capacity.
Councilor Hannah, as you know, we've been having a great working relationship recently with Bristol. So maybe we should direct the administrator to have some conversations so we can work as cooperatively as we have been working lately.
I don't think we're gonna get a gas line. Yeah. But anything you can do on that front. The other one that I think also is important for us in Portsmouth here is to keep funding the DOT and the transportation efforts. We've got several projects on the tip that are coming online, and we'd like to keep those. We'd like to keep the momentum there and see what we can do to improve our infrastructure here, especially.
Sure.
The temporary paving on East Main Road was a help last year, but it's already starting to.
Well, the spots that they didn't do are really starting to
I
show.
know.
Sure.
One of the things that my experience with the DOT was that Portsmouth tended to be a fairly ornery community. And when they came in, people always had better ideas than they did. And they are not in the business of trying to do PR things every time they're trying to pave a road. I say this, with really meaning no offense to anybody, but if we want them to come here and do the work that's necessary, we have to at least, try to support what they're doing. They are the traffic engineers. They are the people who are supposed to understand how the flow works and how to best do it. So I would love to see us as a community at least try to support the projects that are here.
Mr. President.
Sure.
If I may, I also put that section on there. My big concern is that we were talking about this when I was previously on the council. Sprague Street, we're still waiting for sidewalks, and while it doesn't really fall into the items you would see for legislative concerns, you may be better off, speaking with Mr. Alviti than we are. Maybe there's some clout there. On a day like this, my biggest concern is we've never had sidewalks for the Manor, Quaker Manor and the Anthony House. And those people, their lifeline is Clements Market. And a day like this is not a good day with the snow. I mean, there's a tree stump right in the middle where people walk. And that's just been ignored for way too long. And I hope we can get somewhere on this soon. So anything you can do.
Okay.
Do any councilors want to add in on any of the other legislative priorities that they may have put on? No.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't have a minute timer, but I'll try to keep it brief. That's fine. I've mentioned this almost every year, but I'll mention it again. On school funding, I'd like to bring your attention to Rhode Island General Law 4445-2, which is the law that preceded the tax cap law, underlies the tax cap law, and states that the state educational operations formula should be increased until state and municipalities equally share the cost of local education. Equally share, that's 50%. We get nothing dramatically remotely close to 50%. It's all under 20 in my lifetime. It's around, what is it, 10?
It's about
50?
8 probably now.
Yeah. And the law continues to say that property tax levies at the local level should be capped as a quid pro quo. That's legislation language, as a quid pro quo for receiving increased state aid to reduce reliance on property tax. The legislature was correct to write all that. The philosophy underlying it is a good one. We shouldn't be funding all of education just based on property taxes. It's not a fair or equitable way to do it. We got only half the solution, though. We got the property tax cap. We didn't get the 50% funding. So we have lost school department program content. We have lost programs because we can't just raise our taxes to pay for it, even if people wanted to. So this section of the law is titled legislative findings, so it's aspirational. There's no teeth behind it. But if you do get pushback from your colleagues at the State House, it might be fair to point out that the legislature really hasn't lived up to its promise. And this was a promise. We've gotten one half of it, and we're left holding the short end of the tax cap.
Yes.
And then you know that I consider you the most considerate member of this council. You do. I actually was on the town council when that legislation was originally passed. They have never funded it. They didn't have the opportunity then to fund it. They don't have the opportunity now to fund it. Getting rid of the car tax did nothing to support the idea. And I think the way I heard your comment seems a little unfair. The state pays much more than 50% of the educational cost of the state. However, that means it's paying 80%, 90%, all of Central Falls, for instance, and it gives very little to the town of Portsmouth. So my understanding and recollection, and my information may be a little dated, was that the state, a very large chunk of the state's budget went to supporting education, and it was more than 50% of the entire amount.
Yeah, like we just attended a training last weekend, the school committee association, Rhode Island. So the state share ratio for Providence is 80%, as you just said. And the governor's proposed formula is very drastic. It's definitely a big change that it is going to be a challenge if our budgets are due and this budget is not finalized till June, how we're going to make that shortfall.
Can I make one other just quick point? I think Len wanted to correct me on something, so I'm gonna keep talking for a while. When I was up at the legislature, and I think my colleagues in government also, I used to hear from the community, oh, we're getting the minimum share. That's totally unfair. We shouldn't be getting the minimum share. Well, minimum share meant that under the formula, we were supposed to get Zippo. And they kept a minimum share, basically, quite frankly, to bribe legislators like me to actually vote for the darn thing and make sure Portsmouth got something, or else I couldn't come home again. Okay, so that's one of the realities. And I do not want people to think, I am Portsmouth bred. I am Portsmouth forever. My father was Portsmouth. My grandfather was Portsmouth. But nonetheless, you have to look at the world, I think, fairly realistically and realize that other communities have their problems, and they're willing to hear ours. Stop.
Still, Levesque, you just made a great point.
Well, then I can go home.
But it needs to be said in reverse. So you were given crumbs to keep you quiet and push you in a corner. I'm paraphrasing what you said.
I'm not saying the other one didn't.
Right, but I think our legislators, along with other rural legislators, can bandy together to fight for their individual towns collectively to say, hey, we in Portsmouth, Middletown, Burrillville, Westerly, we're going to stand together because you don't have all the votes inside the 295 belt to take all other than one socket who's not inside the 295 belt. But
Councilman, this is a debate we could have, and I'm going to be a little hyperbolic here, but let me just say this to you. I could have done that. I did it sometimes, but the fact was I knew it was a barefaced lie, because nobody in Portsmouth has the problem that a kid in the middle of Central Falls or the middle of Providence has, and the educational challenges that community has. And it was, they would look at me and look at all of us and just say, guess what? All you bougies, you ran out of the city because you didn't want to deal with the problems. You're all coming in here and earning money off of the city. And I will tell you, probably the highest paid person that earns money strictly from Portsmouth probably does deliveries from one of the pizza places, because we do not have industry.
I would respectfully disagree. We have plenty of children in our school systems who need this help and need the funding.
I don't disagree.
Not everybody has $1 million salaries and can afford to send their kids to private school. if they
Councilman
chose.
Hamilton, you're not comparing our issues to those of the urban communities.
I'm comparing our issues with those in the urban community who do not pay a dime for educating their children. So when you look at a Central Falls, who is 100% state funded, what is their push, or what is their needs to push them into saying, we're going to do a better job of managing our budget in Central Falls the way Portsmouth has, so that we can actually invest in our children, which they don't do. Central Falls does not invest in their children. I do. Mr. Gleason does.
You're wrong.
Emily
and we can have this conversation some other place, but you're wrong. You're totally wrong.
Absolutely.
You do not know. I went
right.
in as a
I'm gonna jump in here.
into these schools, and I know what those parents and the challenges they had.
I'm not saying the
Because those
parents,
kids were
I'm
doing it.
saying the city government does not invest, and they don't make the changes in how they run their town
You
in
don't
order to
really
invest in
know
their
that,
children.
do you, Keith?
All
I
right,
do.
gentlemen,
You don't really.
we're
know
gonna,
that.
we're gonna move on. I'll be the timer now. Okay.
I just wanted to make one quick remark. Earlier, Chuck, you made the remark that it's believed that we're a wealthy community, but certainly East Greenwich and Barrington are both considered wealthy communities. Barrington's getting 1.9 million more this year. And last year, I don't recall what the number was, but they also got significantly more money. And I don't remember the numbers for East Greenwich, but they're substantial relative to us. It's fluctuating because these are preliminary numbers. I've seen three reports that range anywhere from a loss to us of 540,000, I think it is, versus 50,000. So we don't know where we stand, but it's not good. So
So our message to the legislature is to do your best with, obviously it's been an ongoing battle for years with the school funding formula. But any opportunity to try to look at some equity across the board. And I do agree that everybody has to look at their own specific needs in the communities, but I still think that we are entitled to some additional consideration. And I know you know this because we ask it every year. And Senator Ujifuza usually was the one putting this together. So I'm sure she I'm preaching to the choir on this one.
Yes, sitting on this side, I just want to say, that I appreciate you guys taking the time. I think it's really important that the municipal and state legislators work together. Because if we don't, frankly, the only credibility I have when I'm standing up against a majority or as maybe leadership is that I have to do what my town is asking me to do. And I think Councillor Hamilton makes a great point, which is that numbers can be generated by working together with other municipalities and coming up with coalitions and specific legislative proposals. So to the extent you guys can try to do that and give us the language and get a coalition behind it, I think we stand a lot better chance of getting any of the legislation you'd like to see passed. Secondly, if you look at the asks, of course, the hardest ones involve where we are asking for more money or to pay less money. Let's just face it. If I'm up against 37 other senators, they're not going to want to allow Portsmouth just to pay less or get more. But there is hope around three things. One, I think the procedural ask that you made about being able to make a budget that is timely and not in constant flux is something that we should have support across the board for, because every community would want to be able to make budgetary decisions in a timely manner. So I'm pretty sure we can move forward in doing whatever we can to fix the timing issue, that procedural issue. Secondly, I believe that there is going to be some amount of, working together around the idea that the funding formula should be more transparent. And I'm only starting to realize that that quadratic formula is so opaque. It's unbelievable. And right. And I sat in on the Senate hearings on the funding formula. And so they have this quadratic formula with various variables, and they make you feel bad that you don't understand this fancy math. Well, the fact of the matter is you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that those letters, those variables, X, Y, Z, somebody defined what those variables mean. And it's up to us to try to figure it out and fix it, really? Well, how about we stop that? How about we get rid of that and just say, here's how we decide how the towns get money. You know, if you have X situation, you're going to get X dollars per kid. And I think a fellow senator of mine, Sam Zurier, has put together a pretty good analysis of what this formula is. I'd be happy to share it with whoever is interested in digging into this, but we have got to get this thing more transparent. It is a mess. And I frankly think it was done on purpose to keep people unable to advocate for what they want. And okay. And then the third thing I think we can all gather around is, let's see, procedural. It helps if, something as big as the internet situation, every one of the towns and cities I know wants better internet in the state. Cox has a monopoly. And I just want to let you know that I sat in on an ARPA funds analysis at the Senate, and they said that there's a kind of measly sounding number of 500,000 devoted to broadband. And when people were pressed, like, how come 500,000 when other things get so much more? And the answer was the reason they're focusing on that first is we don't have access to bigger funds until we finish a plan. And so this analysis and plan supposedly will get done with the 500,000, and that will access all the much bigger money that might be available for broadband. So just know that people are sort of on top of that, and that number is a little bit deceptive, so they say. And then the other thing is, what was the other thing? To the extent you all can come up with specifics to flesh out these general asks, that would really, really be helpful. And apparently on the Senate side, we have people who will work with you to craft language for legislation. And contact me tomorrow if you'd like to work with one of these people, because they're called constituent services people. And if you have specific things you want to see happen, I forward your request to these guys, and they will work directly with you to try to work something out, or at least figure out who's working on it. And then, you know, you can maybe even build a coalition around that. So sorry to go on for so long. I should have had the timer. But if you have any other questions, you know how to reach me. And I appreciate that y'all are doing this. It's just super hard.
Make a quick comment, Mr. Giudice, before you go. Sorry, Senator. And this would be.
Call me Linda.
So I put on number one about reinstituting the general revenue sharing. That's not a Portsmouth issue. That was wiped out for every city in town. So that's something that you should be able to gain traction on. I understand where it came from back in 2008-9. We had the big crash. Money was really tight. They said, you know what? You guys are all on your own. It would be nice now that we've had 3 years of 417 million, 878 million, and in the reported 610, it might be 500, whatever it is, surpluses that get reinstituted back into the budget to help all of the cities and towns lower the burden of the property taxpayers in their towns. So that's something that should be championed by every single legislator out there.
Well, I think you'll see that certain towns would benefit more or less on this. And so I haven't done that analysis, but I would suspect that there are certain people who did benefit from keeping it this way.
Let's say there's 39 cities and towns and 5 of them will get the lion's share.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the town of Portsmouth or the town of Middletown or town of Tiverton got $1 million in general revenue sharing, that goes a hell of a long way to keeping the property taxes lower in the town.
Right. No, understood.
That's all.
I will. So noted.
It's not a huge ask. There's a $610 million surplus if we throw $100 million at it and we get $1 million. Guess what? We don't have to raise our taxes by 4% this year.
Well, I know that,
Mr. President, can I interrupt for a second? One, Senator, I think that maybe Councilman Hamilton and I can be your lobbying team and go up to Providence with you and fight for these issues because we are so much on the same page. I will tell you that I know they always use the term surplus. I hate the term surplus. Governments have to have a reserve. They have to have a reserve that allows them, in case there's a catastrophe, to keep their operations going during at least a couple of months while they're not generating revenue. I know they always call it a surplus, and then everybody runs in and wants to use it for something. But most appropriately, it should be put in capital and it should be held in reserve against the very bad events that might come.
I would agree with you that you should use it for one-time issues if there's a surplus. But when you have 3 running surpluses of roughly $500 million, and the fact that the budget went from $9 billion to $14 billion pretty much overnight, says that there's some room in there that they could return some of that general revenue sharing money to the towns and take the reliance of property taxes off of the smaller towns. Something that Governor Raimondo said she was going to do, and something that Governor McKee should know about, being the ex-mayor of Cumberland.
Well, and let me just tell you, that, you know, the car tax repeal, which actually benefited most of the rural communities like us most. Well, that was a transfer of money from the state to the community and helped to lower our property taxes. It was not, in my mind, a good idea, but it is something that in fact reduced the amount spent by citizens, and we got the money in different. It didn't really show up at the lower taxes. However, the citizens had lower expenses because they weren't paying that tax any longer.
All right.
right, well, there are definitely towns that send contingencies up to lobby. And so I will keep you abreast of opportunities. But it's tough, you know, for working people to actually show up and testify. So
Thank you.
3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon.
yeah. Not good. Any other questions, I guess, before yes.
No, I would just want to say thank you, Senator.
Okay, thank you.
And all
And
right.
I think Senator Raposa and Rep. Cortland hit a lot of the topics really well. I just wanted to come up here and reiterate regarding the broadband issue. We did recently create a broadband commission through the state who is evaluating broadband statewide and is going to be looking at available funding for that. They actually have a draft plan now. But I just wanted to let everybody know that through Commerce RI, they're actually trying to get feedback from all of our communities to get a better sense of what the broadband situation looks like in each of our communities. So if you go to Commerce RI, there is a speed test and a survey that they are encouraging everyone to take. And I'm encouraging all of the people in my district to take so that they have a much clearer picture of what it looks like here, where the needs are the greatest and where the most investment needs to occur. So I'm just want to encourage everybody to participate in that. Thank you.
Thank you. So,
Mr. President,
yes, please.
if I may.
You may.
First off, thank you for bringing all these good points up. I just have to bring up one lowly point to explain my, what I added here. I want to speak about the lowly bivalve that perhaps Chuck's grandfather and father dug in Island Park many years ago. Basically it says work with RIDEM to open up more of Portsmouth waters to shell fishing. I'm sure there was a little bit of head scratching on that. We have the most coastline in out of any community in the state, but we have a lot of areas that are still closed to shell fishing. Many of us spent money to install new septic systems, advanced types. Everybody had their system checked to make sure that we met the MOV, I guess we had from RIDEM, and we're going through that cycle again. So I'm hoping that it was for some good purpose, that our waters are cleaner now. And I just, again, if you know people from Rhode Island DEM and you can explore that option with them. I know Governor McKee has said he's going to add force to RIDEM. And we had a gentleman come before the Harbor Commission. He said, we have a lot of areas around the state that are clean, but we don't have enough enforcement people, so we keep them closed for shell fishing purposely. So hopefully that could change and hopefully that could be, helpful to the people of Portsmouth that want to shellfish here. So something small, but I appreciate you looking into it.
And CRMC is also responsible for permitting shellfishing. And there is interest, but the community also has to be receptive to that industry as well as public access, which I appreciate all of your support of. We really do need to maintain this industry and the public waterways we have. So I know that you are championing those efforts, so thank you.
Okay.
If.
Yes. Okay.
I had by town clerk, the support legislation for creation of special education ombudsman.
Yeah.
I'm putting on my payment. I have represented a number of people needing special ed and learning disabled people. One of the real problems is that it takes forever for a final decision. Anybody familiar with it, there's an initial process, there's initial suggestion that there's a learning disability necessary. There is a multidisciplinary thing. Sometimes you're a team. Sometimes you get an IEP, but if you disagree with it, you have to go to U.S. District Court. Well, you have to go to the Department of Education, then U.S. District Court, then U.S. Court of Appeal, then the Supreme Court. The ombudsman idea is saying, look, this is a waste of money. These kids' needs are fairly evident, and the real argument is over money. So let's get the kid the need, the thing that they need, and let's figure out the money some other time.
Thank you, Ms. Lebec. So there was also some staff priorities. I don't know if I know Lisa had one on here from HR. Is that correct? Ryan has number 10 and Jen has number 11. Do any of you want to speak to those, or do you think they're self-explanatory? You're good? Okay. Okay, good. Okay. All right. Well, I think that concludes our ask. We thank you for coming tonight and for taking this into consideration, and any help would be much appreciated. And I think we do have some opportunity to coordinate on some of these things and see if there's a way we can continue to keep the ball moving on some of these priorities. So thank you all. You're welcome to stay for the remainder of the night. Now. Yeah, so
He still has to stay.
so yeah, I think this we'll move on from our legislative priorities, and then we'll go into the budget. The joint, yes, the joint budget presentation. So for those of you who were here for the priorities and you want to leave, now's a great opportunity. All right. So we'll turn it over to Mr. Rayner. Too many
Sorry,
mics.
yep, you're right. Only been doing this for a year. Stay with you more. I don't know if that's showing up.
It's showing on streaming. It is streaming.
But not on that screen.
Is there any way we can get it on the?
Yeah, one of the cameras is failing, so it's.
I'll do my best to talk through it then. Okay, so if you can go to. Okay, you're on the right slide. I'll just tell you when to change slides for those at home. Mr. President, Council, School Committee, we're just going to give a very high level brief of where we think the budget is going this next fiscal year, and what are the factors that we're aware of that we think you need to pay attention to as well. So with respect to the budget drivers, it essentially is always the same. Our revenues, expenditures, capital needs, and initiatives that we think we need to tackle. We're now well into the development of the proposed budget for 2024. And this brief will provide some highlights with respect to the budget drivers as we see them. Okay, you should be on the revenue slide. Thank you. Okay, so we'll start with revenues. We've, in your previous discussions, we started talking about state aid. Bottom line is, the numbers that came out Thursday were extremely disappointing. They are changing the governor has proposed in his budget proposal a change in the school funding formula, which will have a significant impact on the school. But I'll talk about what's happening with town aid. Changes to the formula aid to Portsmouth over the last year's revised figures totaled just over $22,000. That represents a 0.79% increase in a proposal in the proposed aid to the town year over year, in an era when we're looking at 7+% inflation year over year. The library has been proposed for a 2% increase. Tom will speak to school aid, but there is a significant reduction, obviously, in proposed aid for schools. With respect to the car tax, as Councilor Lebec has eloquently stated, the car tax has been eliminated. However, current legislation will provide for the same reimbursements that we received last year. With respect to housing, new housing construction continues to level off. However, renovations, additions, and reconstructions are still going gangbusters. We're going to say that while it's still high, we expect that those impacts to the revenue side of the budget will remain steady. And so we expect only a slight increase in these revenues. With respect to the interest rates that we're seeing in the town, we're experiencing very high interest rates on town deposits, and we expect that that will remain for the same for the following year. As most people are aware, the latest property revaluations were completed last month. These revaluations will be reflected in the next budget and in proposed tax rates. Additionally, the payment in lieu of tax agreement, the pilot agreement with Quaker Manor, will come to an end, and that property will return to the traditional tax roll next year. And then with respect to the American Rescue Plan, funds have been received, and they have been placed into a special revenue account, and they're used only by council direction in accordance with priorities that you approved last year. These funds, as a reminder, must be obligated in calendar year 2024 and expended no later than the end of 2026. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Kenworthy.
Thank you, Mr. Rayner. So you can see there, our first bullet, we were finishing it up on the school side on Wednesday in order to be able to get it over for any final updates on the town. So unfortunately, we do have a state aid projection from the governor, as we've talked about, which doesn't paint a very good picture for Portsmouth right now. So there's been a lot of discussion about it this evening. What I can tell you in our latest running of the numbers and the calculations, we would be standing to lose about $257,000 on the school side in state aid. So biggest driver of that, although we talked about the high cost special education number, we did actually see an increase. So more money was put into that, which, you know, if that was the end of the story, that would be great for us, but we saw a dramatic reduction in group home aid. So it's another one of the categorical funds that doesn't get mentioned often, but we just have beds that are not being used in Portsmouth in our group homes. We have very little control over that year to year, and that's one of the additional significant factors for us. So again, right now, as things stand, and we are obviously closely monitoring any updates, but it's looking like a $257,000 loss for us as we go into this budget process. So, you know, for most communities, it's either state aid or that local town or city appropriation, you know, revenue. That's the end of the story. Here in Portsmouth, we have a couple of relationships which also bring in, you know, a significant amount of money for us, that we do everything possible to make sure that those revenue streams, you know, stay as high as possible. So I can report that we did just enter into a new long-term agreement with Little Compton to send their high school students to us, excuse me. And we negotiated, I think, a very favorable rate compared to the last contract. The problem is, like many communities, including ourselves, Little Compton is seeing declining enrollment. So the actual number of students that we're receiving from Little Compton is, driving that number down. And then we also have out-of-district career and tech students that we're able to bring into Portsmouth High School. So we do have 4 state-approved programs, a few others in the pipeline. And this has been a very successful program for us. We started back in, I believe it was 2015. In that first year, in addition to the benefits that it provides for our own Portsmouth students in Little Compton, that first year we brought in 5 students from outside districts. We're projecting to be up to 45 students from surrounding districts next year. So we're continuing to grow little by little. And all told, we are projecting about $1.8 million between both of those lines for next year. So it'll be, as much as we can do to help on the revenue side there.
Mr. President, I guess one quick question for Dr. Kenway. You mentioned empty beds. If those beds are filled in the middle of the year, how well are we able to get the money that quote is supposed to follow the child?
That money does typically come to us, and the state will do kind of a true up, so to speak. The problem that we're facing, and we didn't realize how significant it was until we dug in to these numbers, is we're actually down 12 total bed that they've closed, if you will, those homes basically on the Boys Town campus.
So with respect to expenditures, unfortunately, you're going to hear a recurring theme tonight. Historically high inflation is having an effect throughout the budget as prices for goods and services are increasing dramatically. We are working to identify cost savings throughout the entire budget so as to mitigate the effect inflation will have on our expenditures. On the town side, we will begin collective bargaining negotiations with the Public Works Union this week. That contract expires June 30th. While inflation is affecting all expenditures, we are working diligently to stretch our financial resources as far as possible to the benefit of everyone. Our Achilles heel is and will remain for the foreseeable future retention and staffing. Quite simply, town, city, and state governments are finding it harder to find and compete and pay for qualified, experienced municipal employees. This will have to be addressed in future labor negotiations and employee recruitment. We are also projecting a flat or a small increase in healthcare premiums due to favorable utilization trends. And our OPEB pay-go expense is projected to slightly decrease in the next year. We will continue to try and increase the OPEB fund this year to decrease our liability risks. With respect to the town's defined benefit plan, the actuarially determined contribution will increase slightly in the next fiscal year. With respect to transfer station operations, the tipping fee will increase to $63 a ton mid-next year. The stations operate in a calendar year, so the increase for a half year of increased tipping fees is already reflected in the established sticker price. The next calendar year will see the tipping fee increase applied to the sticker price for the whole year. And that obviously will be sold in January 2024. Additionally, the SAFER grant expires mid-March of 2024. We will have to budget the payroll expense for the 8 additional firefighters currently covered by the grant from mid-March to the end of the fiscal year, June 30th. Lastly, there are significant capital needs, requests, and projects we need to address. There are significant budget drivers next year, including our first payment on the recent school bond, which will require us to prioritize and pare down capital expectations in the next budget proposal. Dr. Kenway.
Thank you. So on the school side, expenditures, obviously for us, the largest driver there is personnel as well. And though we do have some part-time or individual contract employees, most of our employees fall into one of our 2 main unions, NEA Portsmouth being the largest, and then Council 94 for our support professionals. So happy to report that we have current contracts with both of those groups that will take us through the end of fiscal year 25. The other side, those are fixed costs, right, that we automatically have to put into our budget as a starting point. For healthcare, I believe, as of again, when we were putting this together, we had not received any updates on premium rates from the trust. We're assuming right now low single-digit increase, as I'm sure the town is as well. Retirement for us, the ESRI pension contribution remains flat, and Mr. Deere right now is projecting the town pension arc to increase by 128,000. Probably the area where we see the biggest effect from inflation is our transportation contract. It's directly tied into the inflation rate. So right now, as everyone knows, that's trending about 6 to 7%. So that will automatically go into our transportation costs for next year. And then special education, it's come up a few times already this evening as a main unpredictable, sometimes cost driver on our side. As Mr. Levesque mentioned, it's number one, what's in the best interest of students and their needs. Number two, it's the law. So, we have to, provide these services for our students, but there are a lot of unpredictable costs here. So I just highlighted a few that people may not realize. So one-to-one nursing, so these would be for students with significant, health concerns. This is outside of, obviously, each of our schools has a school nurse teacher, but sometimes based on need, a student will require a one-to-one nurse, whether they're with us. Sometimes this is even in and out of district placement. So we're placing the student, spending money on a tuition, but we also have to provide a nurse. So right now, for instance, in this fiscal year, we have 3 students. Typically, that number is around 1 for us. So we just, don't know, how that cost is going to factor in from year to year. Out of district tuitions, we've mentioned. Again, we do our best to provide services for students in Portsmouth in our schools, but there are sometimes needs that we just don't have the programs for in our schools. So we do have to send students to special placements out of district. And then statewide transportation, we've mentioned a few times, but inflation factoring in there. And unfortunately, right now, there is just no viable alternative to using statewide transportation for when we're sending students out of district.
Next slide, please. So continuing on expenditures, so we have to address debt service. As I've already stated, we will see an increase in bond debt service. However, we will also see a decrease in our capital lease service next fiscal year. Next slide. So essentially, bond debt service was scheduled to decrease by approximately $200,000 next year. However, we did do the school bond and we issued that debt. So the first payment on that bond is due this year, this calendar year, and that will be included in the next fiscal year budget proposal. So the net effect will be an increase of a little over $600,000 in bond debt service next year. Fortunately, we will see a decrease in the capital lease service of over $230,000. Barring any new debt issue, debt service will remain fairly stable until the late 2030s. Next slide, please. So if you remember, we have been able to negotiate 5-year vice 3-year contracts with 4 of the 5 townside unions. As stated earlier, negotiations with the Public Works Union will begin this week, and we will work our hardest to come to an agreed upon terms prior to the end of this fiscal year. However, the negotiation is likely to be ongoing and not settled prior to the submission of the proposed budget to the council at the end of March. We will do our best to capture anticipated budget impacts for the next fiscal year in that proposal. Additionally, we remain very satisfied with our collaboration between the town and the school across 3 important areas: facilities management, information technology, and the school resource officer program. We will continue to seek more collaborative efforts in the future. Next slide, please. So we'll talk about capital. You see here listed for the town side, the major capital improvement projects that have been requested to start or continue next year. Due to reasons previously highlighted, I anticipate this list will have to be reprioritized and pared down prior to the final proposal to the council. Of note, we will try to factor in an ADA capable door at the south end of the town hall, fleet replacement assets, building improvements, and an increased road paving budget for public works, continued improvements at Glen Farm, continuation of the new public safety self-funded capital plan, an asbestos abatement and facility improvement program at the fire station, projects to address safety and security concerns for the police department, an overhaul of the town website, continued investment in recreation, and application of funding to facility condition assessment priorities that have been identified in a previous report as able.
Thanks. On the school side for capital, we recognize that we are, in year 2 of the bond projects, and that was a significant investment on the part of Portsmouth taxpayers. As you know, the taxpayers, voters of Portsmouth approved the $21.4 million bond last fall, which will result in significant health and safety improvements. And again, over the cost of that bond, about $8 million will be returned to the town with state approval. So I'm happy to report that year 1 projects were completed last summer. Most of the work that we are doing around the summers. So year 1 projects were completed on time and under budget. Actually last summer, and we are with our district building committee that meets regularly, shepherding our year 2 projects, which will take place in the summer of 2023. However, capital needs do continue on the school department side. So we are doing our best to keep up as we can with regular maintenance and repairs to our 4 schools in our administration building. We do have, just as an example, some emergency needs that we're currently trying to address. So recently, the pumps on the high school septic system failed. So we discovered that they were original. Luckily, there are 2 of them. One of them is still working while we had sent the other one out for repair. And then it was recommended that we replace them as soon as possible. So we're working all of that in right now to a current plan. All of our parking lots, could probably use a good facelift, but particularly right now, the middle school parking lot is the one that's in dire need of some TLC, including the curbing on sidewalks, which is just making for some difficult areas to walk. And then last spring, all districts in Rhode Island were asked to do an assessment with police and fire personnel, which we did to request what we saw as the most pressing safety up and security upgrades that we could make. So of course, most people don't read the fine print on that. We have to use our own money to pay for those. The state isn't offering, any free money for us to do that. So we, but we obviously think that they're important. So we do have a significant capital request that we're in the process of finalizing that we will be submitting to the state. We should then be able to get the state reimbursement on that, which will again come back to the town. So I'll update you on that as it proceeds.
So the last major budget drivers are initiatives we intend to pursue or hope to pursue. On the town side, the initiatives that we hope to continue or pursue include the continuation of our IT system improvements and upgrades, strengthening of our emergency management and recreation departments, the redoubling of our effort to seek grant opportunities, and maintaining our focus on climate resilience efforts, obtaining and upgrading important town resources, including the Old Stone Bridge and Weaver Cove, and continuing to work to align our zoning ordinance to our comprehensive plan.
Thank you. On the school side, there's a lot of things that we could have put in this category, but just wanted to use the opportunity to highlight. ARPA for us is more commonly referred to as ESSER. So we have 2 main funding streams that we are managing there, and you may see news reports once in a while about towns or communities that are being called on the carpet since we're not spending all of their funds. I can tell you that that is not the case here. So ESSER 2 funds, which will be expiring as of September 30th, 2023, were designed to help kind of everybody come back after the pandemic initially hit for the last few school years. And we do intend to spend every penny there. And then we also have ESSER 3 funding, which will expire in September of 2024. That is a lot more specific to address learning loss, and we were able to use 25% of those funds for capital improvement. So we did take advantage of that, and we are putting in new HVAC systems in our Portsmouth High School and Middle School libraries, which will help with air quality there. We have a lot of other grants that we manage, but the next largest would be a $500,000 over 5 years. So this will go through May of 2025 Department of Defense grant to help improve our science curriculum. The one thing that you hear most consistently, this is a lot of the funds that go to support the Ag Innovation Farm, but there are a lot of other science initiatives here as well.
So, Town Council and School Committee, that concludes our brief. Bottom line is, I know I sound like a broken record every year, but this year in particular, getting hit by high inflation, the loss of significant aid to the town, and priorities that just keep piling up. It's going to be an extremely difficult budget year. We will do our best to keep the rates reasonable, but I'm not going to offer any false hopes. This is going to be a tough budget year.
Ditto.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Rayner and Dr. Kenworthy for the presentation. I know it's preliminary, and as you've stated, there's still a lot of work to be done here to sharpen the pencils and see what we can do during the process. Do we have any questions, comments from counselors at this point, or school committee members? Timers are off. All right. Well, and at this point, I'd like to thank the school committee members for joining us tonight up here. It's great to have you. You can come anytime. No, I appreciate you coming out. The legislative priorities is definitely important, and having the combined efforts here with our legislators really sends the message that we need their help. And I think if we all work together, we can try to make some progress. So again, thank you all for coming tonight. At this point, we can take a little 5-minute recess to allow school committee members to exit, and we'll do some housekeeping up here. There's way too many chairs up here. Again, claustrophobic. So we just take a little 5-minute recess.
That was fun.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Hold on, Tom.
It just started.
You gotta put them on the other side.
For everybody in the audience and particularly for those of you listening at home, we're going to reboot the audiovisual system in town council. So please log back on in about 5 minutes. Thank you.